The sun hasn't yet burned through the desert haze when Colonel Guy Townsend climbs into the cockpit of a machine that doesn't look like it should fly. The B-52 prototype squats on the tarmac like a steel cathedral, its 8 engines hanging from swept wings that span 185 feet, longer than the Wright brothers' first flight. The fuselage gleams dull silver in the pre-dawn light, rivets running in perfect lines down its 159-foot length. Inside the cockpit, Townsend runs his hands over controls that feel too simple for something this enormous, too conventional for something meant to carry atomic fire across continents. Behind him, in the navigator station below, Major Paul Leonard adjusts his instruments and tries not to think about the previous prototype, the YB-52, that flew just 2 months ago. That bird had handled well enough, but this one, serial number 49 to 231, carries modifications that exist only on paper until this moment. The intercom crackles. Edwards Tower, this is Air Force XB-52, requesting clearance for taxi. The voice that comes back sounds almost bored, as if giving permission for a bomber the size of a warehouse to attempt flight is routine. It isn't. Nothing about this is routine. Townsend advances the throttles. The 8 Pratt & Whitney J57 turbojets, each producing 10,000 pounds of thrust, spool up with a sound like industrial demons awakening. The aircraft begins to roll, and the tower can feel the vibration through concrete and steel. This is Boeing's answer to Curtis LeMay's impossible demand. Build a bomber that can fly higher, farther, and faster than anything in the sky, carry enough nuclear weapons to erase cities, and do it reliably enough that America can keep a fleet of them in the air 24 hours a day, every day, forever. The Soviets, when their intelligence officers first see the photographs, will laugh. But that's later. Right now, Townsend is pushing the throttles to take off power, and the XB-52 is accelerating down the runway with all the grace of a freight train, eating up concrete at an alarming rate. The nose wheel lifts. The main gear follows. And against every instinct that says something this heavy, this ungainly, belongs on the ground, the Stratofortress climbs. By the time the sun fully breaks over the San Gabriel Mountains, the bomber is at 30,000 feet, and Guy Townsend is grinning inside his oxygen mask. The bird flies. More than that, it flies well. The controls are responsive despite the mass. The engines run smooth. Every system that needs to work is working. Below, the Mojave Desert spreads out like crumpled brown paper, and Townsend banks the aircraft into a gentle turn, feeling the authority in the control surfaces, the stability in the platform. What he cannot know, what no one in that cockpit or in the Boeing engineering team or in the Air Force Procurement Office can possibly know, is that variations of this exact aircraft will still be flying in 2025. That pilots, not yet born, will command Stratofortresses in conflicts not yet imagined. That the Soviet Union, the entire reason this bomber exists, will collapse into history while B-52s continue their patrol routes overhead. In Moscow, in the offices of the Soviet Strategic Rocket Forces, General Pavel Baditsky reviews the American bomber programs with a mixture of amusement and professional interest. The intelligence briefs detail the B-52's specifications: subsonic speed, conventional aluminum construction, lack of stealth features. His analysts note that the aircraft represents American industrial thinking at its most brutish, solving the problem of strategic bombing through sheer size and payload rather than elegance or innovation. Let them build their flying warehouses, Baditsky reportedly tells his staff. We will build missiles that make bombers obsolete. He isn't entirely wrong. The ICBM age is coming, and it will arrive faster than anyone in 1952 anticipates. But what Baditsky and his successors will consistently fail to understand is that the B-52 isn't just a weapon system. It's a platform. And platforms, when designed with enough underlying soundness, can be adapted long past their intended retirement date. The first operational B-52A rolls off the production line in August 1954. By 1955, Strategic Air Command is integrating the B-52B variant into its nuclear deterrent force. The aircraft can carry a payload of 70,000 pounds, enough for multiple hydrogen bombs or dozens of conventional weapons. Its range, with aerial refueling, is effectively unlimited. Its service ceiling exceeds 50,000 feet, beyond the reach of most contemporary fighters. Curtis LeMay, now commanding SAC with the intensity of a man perpetually preparing for Armageddon, watches his fleet grow. B-52s begin their Chrome Dome missions, continuous airborne patrols with live nuclear weapons, ensuring that even if the Soviet Union launches a surprise first strike and destroys every American missile silo and bomber base, aircraft already in the air will survive to retaliate. It is deterrence by visible, audible, tangible presence. Somewhere over the Arctic Ocean, right now, and every moment of every day, B-52 is flying with the payload to end civilization. Soviet air defense planners track these missions obsessively. They develop new surface-to-air missiles, new radar systems, new interceptor jets. They write technical papers explaining why the B-52, for all its capability, represents obsolete thinking. The future belongs to missiles that fly faster than sound, to rockets that arch into space before plummeting down on their targets, to automated systems that remove human error from the equation. And yet, in Vietnam, when that future war arrives unexpected and unwanted, it won't be missiles that America calls upon to carpet bomb the Ho Chi Minh Trail. When the Cold War demands a visible show of force, something that allies can see and adversaries must acknowledge, it won't be an ICBM silo that opens. When precision strikes become paramount, and then conventional deterrence, and then counterinsurgency, and then anti-terror operations, the platform that adapts, again and again, is the one Soviet generals dismissed as obsolete before it even entered full production. Back at Edwards, on that December morning in 1952, Guy Townsend brings the XB-52 around for landing. The big bomber settles onto the runway with surprising gentleness for something weighing 185,000 pounds empty. The test is successful. The mission parameters are met. The debrief will fill pages with technical data that Boeing engineers will analyze for weeks. But the real test, the one that matters, won't be graded for another 70 years. March 2nd, 1955. Castle Air Force Base, California. Captain Harold Howe, Salisbury, watches the morning fog lift off the Sierra Nevada foothills and thinks about mathematics. Specifically, the mathematics of deterrence. His B-52B, tail number 52 to 8711, sits on the alert pad with 5 other Stratofortresses, each loaded with 4 Mk-15 thermonuclear bombs. Each bomb yields 3.8 megatons. Each aircraft, therefore, carries roughly 15 megatons of destructive force, equivalent to 15 million tons of TNT, or about 750 Hiroshimas. 6 aircraft, 90 megatons, enough to erase every major city in the Western Soviet Union. And Castle is just one base. Salisbury's navigator, First Lieutenant Robert Chun, emerges from the operations building with their mission briefing tucked under his arm. The folder is sealed with red tape and stamped top secret in letters that seem unnecessarily large. Everyone knows what's in it. Everyone knows what Chrome Dome missions entail. You fly north. You fly a specific route that keeps you in international airspace, but close enough to Soviet borders that their radar watches every mile. You fly for hours. You maintain radio discipline. You wait for a code word that will probably never come. And if it does come, if the coded emergency action message crackles through your headset with the authentication phrases that mean American cities are burning, you turn your aircraft toward the target coordinates preloaded in your navigation system, and you deliver 4 suns to Earth. Fog's lifting, Chin says, unnecessarily. He's 26 years old and has a degree in astrophysics from MIT. The Strategic Air Command is full of men like him now, technically brilliant, psychologically screened, ideologically reliable. SAC doesn't just want pilots who can fly. They want pilots who will fly that mission if it comes. The screening process is extensive. The failure rate is high. Salisbury nods. Pre-flight in 20. Pre-flight in 20. The B-52B is an evolution from the original XB-52, incorporating lessons from early test flights and operational experience. The most significant change is internal. The bomb bay has been completely redesigned to accommodate the new generation of thermonuclear weapons. But there are dozens of smaller improvements: better avionics, more reliable hydraulics, improved crew stations. Boeing's engineers work in a constant cycle of incremental enhancement, each variant incorporating knowledge from thousands of flight hours. By 1955, the production line at Boeing's Seattle plant is manufacturing B-52s faster than SAC can train crews to fly them. The Air Force has ordered 744 aircraft across multiple variants. The unit cost is approximately $6 million per aircraft, roughly $70 million in 2025 dollars. But LeMay argues that the price is irrelevant. You cannot put a cost on national survival. You cannot negotiate with Soviet intentions. You can only maintain force sufficient to make nuclear war unthinkable. At Ramstein Air Base in West Germany, intelligence officers from the 7,499th Support Group compile reports on Soviet reactions to the B-52 deployment. The reports make interesting reading. Soviet military journals publish articles with titles like "The Last Gasp of Manned Bomber Aviation" and "American Desperation in the Missile Age." Pravda runs features showing Soviet citizens that American strategy relies on outdated technology while the USSR pushes forward into the space age. The propaganda has a purpose beyond morale. Soviet defense planners genuinely believe manned bombers represent a transitional technology, soon to be superseded by ICBMs. And they're partially correct. The R-7 Semyorka missile, which will launch Sputnik in 1957, is already in development. It can strike American cities with no warning beyond the 30 minutes it takes to cross the pole. No bomber, no matter how fast or high-flying, can match that. But Major General Alexander Pokrushkin, hero of the Soviet Union and deputy commander of the Soviet Air Defense Forces, files a classified memo that takes a different view. His analysts have studied the B-52's specifications carefully. What concerns Pokrushkin isn't the bomber's current capability, it's the aircraft's potential for modification. The airframe is overbuilt, designed with substantial strength margins. The bomb bay is enormous and adaptable. The electrical systems can support additional equipment. Most importantly, the basic design is sound enough that Boeing could theoretically continue upgrading it indefinitely. This aircraft, Pokrushkin writes, represents not a weapon, but a weapons platform. We should not assume the Americans will use it only as currently configured. His memo circulates through Soviet military bureaucracy and is largely ignored. The focus remains on missiles, on the coming space age, on technologies that will render bombers irrelevant. Back at Kassel, Salisbury, and Schön complete their pre-flight inspection. The walk-around takes 45 minutes. 8 engines to check, each with turbine blades that must be visually inspected for damage. Landing gear struts thick as tree trunks. Wing surfaces that require a ladder to reach. The B-52 is so large that pre-flight procedures are conducted by multiple crew members simultaneously. The pilot checks the forward section while the co-pilot examines the aft. The navigator inspects the lower deck while the electronic warfare officer reviews his station. At 0630 hours, the crew of 6 climbs aboard. Salisbury and his co-pilot, Captain James Watts, take the upper deck seats. The cramped cockpit is designed for function, not comfort. Instruments crowd every surface. Circuit breakers line overhead panels in rows. The control yokes are simple wheels like something from a 1940s transport because that's essentially what they are. The B-52's flight control philosophy is conservative by design. Below them, in the windowless lower compartment, Chun settles into the navigator station alongside Bombardier First Lieutenant Eugene Martinez. This is the intellectual center of the aircraft, where maps and radar scopes and calculations transform theory into targeting solutions. Behind them, in isolation, sits the electronic warfare officer and the gunner. men who will fight the defensive battle if Soviet interceptors appear. Salisbury starts the engines in sequence. Number 7 first, the starboard outboard, because that's the engine that powers the essential electrical systems during startup. The J-57 spools up with a whine that builds to a roar. Then number 8, then 6, working inboard. The aircraft trembles as each engine lights. By the time all 8 are running, the noise inside the cockpit is loud enough that conversation requires intercom. Tower clears them for taxi. The B-52 lumbers toward the runway with the ponderous dignity of its size. In the tower, air traffic controllers watch the bomber pass with expressions mixing awe and routine. All because the thing is genuinely impressive, routine because they've seen it dozens of times this month alone. Salisbury performs the pre-takeoff checks from memory. Control surfaces, checked. Engine instruments, green. Fuel, full and balanced. Bomb bay, armed but safed. The safeties on nuclear weapons involve multiple mechanical and electrical locks, each requiring specific actions to release. The system is designed so that no single person can accidentally trigger detonation. No single failure can cause an unintended explosion. But everyone aboard knows the safeties work both ways. They prevent accidents, but they can also be disabled if the proper codes are received. Castle Tower, Hobo 27 ready for departure. Hobo 27, winds calm, cleared for takeoff runway 13. Salisbury pushes the throttles forward. 8 engines surge to takeoff power. 80,000 pounds of thrust, pushing 185,000 pounds of aircraft, plus 90,000 pounds of fuel, plus 30,000 pounds of weapons. The acceleration is surprisingly brisk for something this massive. The runway lights blur past. The airspeed indicator climbs. 80 knots, 100, 120. At 140 knots, Salisbury eases back on the yoke, and the B-52 rotates, nose lifting, main gear following, and then they're airborne, climbing into morning sky that's turned from gray to pale blue. The mission will last 14 hours. They will fly north over Canada, then northeast toward Greenland, then along routes that keep them just outside Soviet radar range, but close enough to be detected. Soviet air defense stations will track them. Fighter interceptors will scramble. And both sides will engage in the elaborate theater of Cold War deterrence. Watching, tracking, never quite engaging, but never relaxing either. In Moscow, the officers monitoring these flights fill logbooks with B-52 sightings and flight patterns. They build databases of American procedures. They develop countermeasures. And they continue to believe, with the certainty of doctrine, that manned bombers are obsolete. The irony will take decades to fully manifest. October 4th, 1957. Tyuratam Missile Range, Soviet Kazakhstan. The R-7 Semyorka rocket lifts off at 10:28 p.m. Moscow time, carrying a polished aluminum sphere 23 inches in diameter. Sputnik 1 weighs 184 pounds and contains nothing but batteries, a radio transmitter, and a fan to regulate temperature. But when it begins broadcasting its simple beep 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 from orbit 98 minutes later, the sound represents more than technological achievement. It represents proof that Soviet missiles can reach space, and therefore, by extension, any point on Earth. In Washington, President Eisenhower receives the news with outward calm and private alarm. In Moscow, Premier Khrushchev understands immediately that the propaganda value exceeds the military significance. In the Pentagon, Air Force planners begin recalculating threat assessments and timeline projections. And at every Strategic Air Command base where B-52s sit on alert, crews hear the news and wonder if they're already obsolete. Colonel Thomas Power, SAC's deputy commander, issues a memo 3 days later. The memo is classified secret and distributed only to wing commanders. Its message is blunt. The successful Soviet satellite launch changes nothing about our mission. Manned bombers remain the cornerstone of American deterrence. ICBMs will supplement, not replace, our capability. Continue operations as planned. But everyone can do the mathematics. A missile travels at 15,000 miles per hour. A B B-52 travels at 500 miles per hour. A missile requires no crew, no life support, no years of training. A missile doesn't get tired, doesn't question orders, doesn't require rest breaks or rotation schedules. The missile age has arrived, and it's difficult to see how bombers fit into it. January 19th, 1958. Homestead Air Force Base, Florida. Major Richard Hubler stands in the operations briefing room watching a film projector display grainy footage of the Soviet Myasishchev M4 bomber, NATO codename Bison. The intelligence assessment estimates the Soviets have built at least 150 of these strategic bombers, possibly more. The M4 has 4 engines, swept wings, and enough range to reach American cities from Soviet bases. It represents a threat that requires constant B-52 patrols to counter. What the intelligence assessment doesn't mention, what American analysts won't discover for another decade, is that the footage shows the same handful of M4s flying repeatedly past the camera during a Moscow air show. The Soviets built fewer than 100 minutes and -4 seconds total, and most have already been relegated to tanker duties because their range and payload don't meet requirements. The bomber gap that American politicians and military leaders warn about exists primarily in miscounted photographs and worst-case assumptions. But Hubler doesn't know this. No one in SAC knows this. And so the Chrome Dome missions continue, and the B-52 fleet expands, and Boeing keeps manufacturing bombers at a pace that makes the Seattle plant the largest single-purpose production facility in the world. Hubler's B-52D, tail number 55-0677, is a newer variant with increased fuel capacity and improved navigation systems. The D model can fly 8,800 miles without refueling, though operational missions typically involve multiple aerial refueling events to extend range effectively to unlimited. His crew has been on alert status for 6 days, living in the alert facility adjacent to the runway, sleeping in their clothes, ready to launch within 15 minutes of receiving the klaxon. The psychological toll of alert duty is subtle but cumulative. You live in a state of perpetual readiness for an event you hope never occurs. You know your aircraft carries weapons that could kill millions. You know that if the order comes, you won't have time to question it, won't have the luxury of moral deliberation. You'll have coordinates and authentication codes and a checklist, and you'll follow the checklist because that's what training has prepared you to do. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Davis, the base psychiatrist, files reports noting increased anxiety among alert crews. The reports document sleep disturbances, stress-related health issues, difficulties with family relationships. SAC responds by rotating crews more frequently and implementing mandatory counseling sessions. But the fundamental tension remains. You are asking men to prepare every day for a mission that represents the end of civilization. At Ramenskoye Airfield outside Moscow, test pilot Viktor Pugachev climbs into the cockpit of a Tupolev Tu-95 Bear, the Soviet Union's answer to the B-52. The Tu-95 is a remarkable aircraft, perhaps the most remarkable bomber ever built. It's powered by 4 turboprop engines driving contra-rotating propellers, and it's the only propeller-driven aircraft capable of flying faster than 500 miles per hour. The contra-rotating props are so loud they can be detected by sonar buoys dropped in the ocean. American submarine crews will report hearing Tu-95s flying overhead while submerged at periscope depth. Pugachev has flown this prototype for 6 months, pushing it through every performance envelope the engineers specify. The Tu-95 handles well, flies fast, carries a substantial payload. But it shares a fundamental limitation with the B-52. Both are subsonic aircraft in an age increasingly dominated by supersonic interceptors and missiles. Soviet design bureaus are already working on next-generation bombers, supersonic aircraft that will make both the Tu-95 and B-52 obsolete. Or so the theory goes. June 12, 1958. Boeing Field, Seattle, Washington. Ed Wells, Boeing's chief engineer, walks the production line with a delegation of Air Force procurement officers. The line stretches nearly a quarter mile, with B-52s in various stages of assembly. At the far end, completed aircraft await final inspections before ferry flights to operational bases. The production rate has reached 8 aircraft per month, an extraordinary output for something this complex. One of the procurement officers asks the question that everyone's been asking since Sputnik. How much longer do you think we'll be building these? Wells considers his answer carefully. He's an engineer, not a prophet, but he's also spent his entire career designing aircraft, and he understands structural engineering in ways most people don't. The B-52's airframe is rated for 5,000 flight hours based on conservative fatigue calculations. Most bombers never reach half that before obsolescence forces retirement. But the B-52's basic structure is overbuilt by design. Boeing's engineers intentionally added strength margins beyond military specifications because they knew modifications and upgrades would add weight over the aircraft service life. These airframes, Wells says, could theoretically fly for 30 years if properly maintained. 30 years would mean B-52s serving until 1988. The procurement officer nods politely, clearly thinking this is optimistic but plausible. None of them imagine the aircraft will still be flying in 2025, 70 years after the first production models rolled off this same line. What Wells and his team have created, though they don't fully realize it yet, is not just a bomber, but a platform with sufficient underlying soundness that it can be continuously modified to meet changing threats. The bomb bay is large enough to accommodate weapons that don't exist yet. The electrical systems can be upgraded to support avionics not yet invented. The engines can be replaced with more efficient models. The structure can handle increased weights. Every weakness can be addressed without redesigning the fundamental airframe. This is the genius of the B-52. It's a platform, not a final product. In Moscow, the Strategic Rocket Forces activate their first operational SS-6 ICBM regiment. The missiles stand in above-ground launchers, requiring hours of fueling before launch, vulnerable to preemptive strikes. But they represent the future that Soviet doctrine has predicted. Marshal Kirill Moskalenko, commanding the rocket forces, tells Khrushchev that within 5 years, ICBMs will render strategic bombers completely obsolete. Sax's B-52 fleet will be reduced to scrap metal or museum pieces. Khrushchev believes him. Soviet industrial planning shifts resources from bomber programs to missile development. The Tupolev and Myasishchev design bureaus receive reduced funding. The future belongs to rockets. At Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, SAC headquarters occupies a complex of buildings that house the operational nerve center of American nuclear deterrence. In the basement behind blast doors, the command post maintains constant communication with every B-52 on patrol. On the wall, a massive board tracks aircraft positions, fuel states, and weapon status. Each symbol represents megatons of destructive power airborne over the Arctic. General Power, who took over SEC command in 1957, walks the command post floor at irregular hours, appearing without warning to check procedures and question decisions. Power is brilliant, demanding, and reportedly unstable. Subordinates describe him as the only man in America more terrifying than the Soviets. He believes absolutely in the necessity of nuclear war-fighting capability and the willingness to use it. When analysts suggest that ICBMs will replace bombers, Power dismisses the idea with contempt. Missiles are a blunt instrument, he tells his staff. They launch, they fly, they detonate. No recall, no flexibility, no ability to demonstrate resolve short of actual attack. Bombers can launch, fly toward targets, and be recalled if tensions de-escalate. Bombers can be seen by adversaries and allies alike. Bombers are deterrents you can watch. It's a compelling argument, and it's one that will keep B-52s relevant long after their supposed obsolescence. The first Boeing B-52H, the ultimate variant, flies in 1961. It incorporates TF-33 turbofan engines that dramatically improve fuel efficiency and reduce the aircraft's infrared signature. The H model will be the final production variant, with 102 built before the production line shuts down in October 1962. Total B-52 production, 744 aircraft across all variants. Total cost, approximately $4.5 billion in 1960s dollars. And in Soviet planning documents, in classified memos that circulate through military and political offices, the B-52 is consistently described as obsolete, a relic, a dinosaur maintained by American stubbornness and institutional inertia. The dinosaur, as it turns out, will outlive its critics. June 18, 1965. Anderson Air Force Base, Guam. Captain Robert Bob Certain watches the sun rise over the Philippine Sea and mentally rehearses bombing calculations he's never performed in a B-52 before. His aircraft, 56-0629, a B-52 F model, sits on the ramp with 27 750-pound general-purpose bombs loaded in its cavernous belly. Not nuclear weapons, conventional explosives, the kind of ordnance designed for tactical targets, not strategic annihilation. This represents a fundamental shift in B-52 doctrine. For a decade, these bombers existed solely as nuclear delivery platforms. Every mission profile, every training scenario, every operational assumption centered on thermonuclear war. But Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara has other ideas. Vietnam is escalating. The Viet Cong control vast sections of South Vietnam's countryside, and McNamara believes that B-52s, with their enormous payload capacity, can deliver conventional bombing on a scale never before attempted. The concept is called arc light. Certain's navigator, First Lieutenant Michael Hessel, spreads targeting charts across his station and frowns at coordinates that represent jungle, not cities. "We're bombing a forest," he says over intercom. 27,000 pounds of bombs into trees. "Intelligence says there's a VC base camp in that grid square," Certain replies, though his tone suggests limited confidence in the intelligence. What neither of them knows, what no one in the operational planning chain fully understands yet, is that they're about to transform the B-52 from a strategic weapon into something far more flexible and far more enduring. The arc light missions will prove that the Stratofortress can perform conventional bombing with devastating effectiveness. And that capability will justify keeping B-52s operational long after ICBMs make their nuclear mission theoretically redundant. At 0600 hours, Certain's B-52 launches as part of a three-ship formation. The other two bombers, flown by Major Carl Patterson and Captain Eugene Dietrich, join up after takeoff, and the small formation turns northwest towards South Vietnam. The flight will take 6 hours. At cruising altitude, the interior of a B-52 is cold enough that crews wear heavy flight jackets even in tropical deployments. The cockpit heater struggles against the negative 40-degree temperatures outside. Hessel navigates using a combination of ground radar, celestial fixes, and dead reckoning. The B-52's bombing system was designed for nuclear weapons dropped from high altitude against fixed coordinates. Adapting it for conventional weapons requires calculations that transform theoretical physics into practical geometry. Release altitude, airspeed, wind correction, bomb ballistics. Each variable affects the impact point, and Hessel has to account for all of them while bouncing in turbulence and reading instruments by dim red cockpit lighting. The target is War Zone D, a dense jungle region northwest of Saigon, known to harbor Viet Cong command facilities. American intelligence has identified the approximate location through radio intercepts and agent reports, then designated a box, a rectangular kill zone roughly 1 mile long and half a mile wide. The three B-52s will drop their entire payload into this box in a carefully timed sequence designed to saturate every square meter. At the initial point, the coordinates where the bombing run begins, Certain steadies the aircraft at 30,000 feet and hands control to Hessel and the bombardier, First Lieutenant James Murphy. The bombing radar shows jungle canopy as an undifferentiated green mass on the scope. No buildings, no vehicles, Just trees. 30 seconds, Murphy announces. The bomb bay doors open with a hydraulic whine. At 30,000 feet, opening bomb bay doors creates enormous aerodynamic drag. The aircraft slows perceptibly, and certain adjusts power to maintain airspeed. 10 seconds. In the bombardier's scope, the electronic crosshairs track toward the pre-calculated release point. The system is entirely analog. Mechanical computers are performing calculations with gears and cams, electrical circuits interpreting radar returns, physical linkages connecting everything to release mechanisms. No digital processors, no software, just the 1950s technology of servos and synchros doing their work with surprising precision. Bombs away. The release is sequential, not simultaneous. 27 bombs drop from internal racks in rapid succession, the aircraft lurching upward slightly as 7 tons of ordnance depart. Behind them, Patterson's and Dietrich's B-52s execute identical procedures, their bombs impacting seconds after certain, creating a rolling carpet of explosions that walks across the jungle. On the ground, the effect is apocalyptic. Nguyen Van Hue, a Viet Cong Company commander, is eating breakfast when the world explodes. No warning, no sound of approaching aircraft. The B-52s fly too high to hear. Just sudden, overwhelming detonation that turns mourning into chaos. Trees disintegrate into splinters. Earth erupts in fountains that rain back down as deadly shrapnel. The overpressure from multiple near-simultaneous blasts collapses lungs, ruptures eardrums, kills through sheer concussive force, even without direct fragmentation hits. Hue's company of 120 men is reduced to fewer than 30 effectives in 90 seconds. The survivors emerge from bunkers and spider holes to find their camp simply gone, transformed from functional military installation to moonscape of overlapping craters. Some are dead from blast effects without visible wounds. Others wander in shock, bleeding from ears and noses, unable to hear or speak coherently. A runner from regimental headquarters arrives 6 hours later, stares at the devastation, and asks what happened. No one can adequately explain. The Americans have been bombing Vietnam for months, but this is different. This isn't tactical air support dropping small loads on suspected positions. This is industrial-scale destruction delivered with strategic bomber precision. Back at Anderson, Certain and his crew debrief with intelligence officers who press for details about the mission profile, system performance, any issues encountered. The debrief lasts 2 hours. Then Certain returns to his quarters, sleeps for 6 hours, and wakes to find his name on the next day's mission schedule. Arc-light sorties will fly daily, then twice daily, then eventually around the clock in continuous rotation. Over the next 8 years, B-52s will fly 126,615 combat sorties over Southeast Asia. They will drop 2.6 million tons of ordnance, more than all Allied bombs dropped in World War II. They will operate in conditions their designers never imagined. Monsoons that turn maintenance into nightmare, heat that degrades hydraulic seals, humidity that corrodes electrical systems, operational tempos that push airframes beyond calculated fatigue limits. And they will prove definitively that the obsolete bomber can adapt to warfare far removed from nuclear deterrence. December 18, 1972. Utapao, Royal Thai Navy Airfield, Thailand. Lieutenant Colonel Don Rissy climbs into his B-52D, tail number 55-0083, for the 11th night of Operation Linebacker 2. The mission brief is stark. Hanoi. Maximum effort. All available aircraft. The objective is to break North Vietnam's will to continue the war by destroying its industrial capacity, military infrastructure, and command authority in a concentrated 11-day campaign. It's the kind of strategic bombing the B-52 was designed for, except with conventional weapons instead of nuclear, and against an enemy with sophisticated Soviet-supplied air defenses. Hanoi is protected by the densest concentration of surface-to-air missiles in history. SA-2 guideline missiles surround the city in overlapping engagement zones. MiG interceptors patrol overhead. Radar-guided anti-aircraft artillery provides additional layer defense. Soviet advisors watched the American bombers with professional interest. The SA-2 system was designed specifically to counter high-altitude strategic bombers. On paper, the B-52 flying at 30,000 feet is an ideal target. Large radar cross-section, predictable flight paths, limited defensive countermeasures. The Soviet advisors tell their North Vietnamese counterparts that the Americans are foolishly sending obsolete bombers against modern defenses. RISI knows the risks. 15 B-52s have already been shot down during Linebacker 2. Each loss represents 6 crew members, some killed, others captured, and paraded through Hanoi streets for propaganda footage. But SAC has adapted tactics. Aircraft approach in 3 ship cells, jamming pods creating electronic interference, chaff corridors degrading radar tracking, route variations preventing predictable patterns. His formation crosses into North Vietnamese airspace at 1830 hours. Immediately, the electronic warfare officer, Major Thomas Wilson, calls out SAM radar illumination. Fanson tracking, 3 o'clock. Second sight, 9 o'clock. They're lighting us up. RISI flies straight and level. The bombing system requires stable flight for accurate release. Evasive maneuvers would defeat the purpose. So he flies into the threat, trusting electronic countermeasures and mutual jamming support from the cell formation. Missiles away. Wilson shouts. 2 birds, 3 o'clock ascending. The SA-2 leaves a brilliant trail of fire against the dark sky. A telephone pole with wings, powered by a sustainer rocket that accelerates it to Mach 3. The missile guidance system tracks its target through ground radar, receiving course corrections via radio link, seeking intercept geometry at combined closing speeds exceeding 2,000 miles per hour. The first missile detonates high, above and ahead of RISI's aircraft. Shrapnel peppers the bomber's upper fuselage but causes no critical damage. The second missile loses radar lock due to jamming and self-destructs. A third missile, launched at the trailing aircraft in the cell, scores a direct hit. RISI sees the flash in his peripheral vision, sees the fireball tumbling, and keys his radio. Cell leader, 3 is hit. 3 is going down. No parachutes. At night, at 30,000 feet, with the aircraft in a terminal spin, crew escape is nearly impossible. But the mission continues. RISI cell reaches the initial point, opens bomb bay doors, begins the final approach. The target tonight is Kin No Storage Complex, a North Vietnamese military depot where supplies and equipment stage before movement south. The bombardier identifies the target through partially obscured radar returns, calculates corrections for wind and altitude, and releases all 27 bombs in a precisely timed sequence. They impact 17 seconds later, creating explosions that light Hanoi's northern suburbs bright enough to cast shadows. Secondary explosions follow as ammunition stores detonate sympathetically. The entire complex becomes a firestorm visible for miles. RISI banks away from the target and descends rapidly to exit North Vietnamese airspace. Behind him, 28 other B-52s are executing identical attacks against different targets throughout the Hanoi Haiphong complex. The raids continue for 11 nights. When they end on December 29th, North Vietnam returns to negotiations and signs the Paris Peace Accords 6 weeks later. In Moscow, Soviet military analysts review the Linebacker 2 results with a mixture of surprise and concern. The B-52s suffered losses. 15 aircraft down represents a 2.7% loss rate, but they accomplished their mission. The obsolete bomber, flying against sophisticated Soviet-supplied defenses, proved effective through sheer weight of numbers, electronic countermeasures, and operational persistence. Major General Mikhail Gromov, assigned to evaluate the campaign, files a classified report noting, "The American B-52, while vulnerable to modern air defenses, remains operationally effective due to payload capacity, crew training, and systematic adaptation to tactical requirements. Dismissing this platform as obsolete may be premature." The report circulates through military channels and is largely ignored. Soviet doctrine continues to prioritize missiles over bombers, interceptors over strategic aviation. The Tu-95 remains in service, but Soviet design bureaus focus on next-generation systems that will render all subsonic bombers irrelevant. They're still planning for the war they expect, not the war that actually arrives. April 30th, 1975. Anderson Air Force Base, Guam. Master Sergeant Donald Purcell watches the last B-52D taxi in from its final Southeast Asia mission and feels something close to relief. The aircraft, tail number 56-0678, is a patchwork of replacement panels, temporary repairs, and structural reinforcement. 8 years of combat operations have aged these bombers decades beyond their chronological service life. Purcell has seen airframes crack from metal fatigue, hydraulic lines fail from tropical corrosion, electrical systems short out from moisture intrusion. He's watched maintenance crews perform miracles daily, keeping aircraft flying that should have been grounded. The Vietnam War is over. Saigon has fallen. And the question everyone at Anderson is asking, what happens to the B-52 now? Strategic Air Command still maintains bomber alert postures against Soviet targets. The nuclear mission remains. But 126,000 combat sorties have revealed something unexpected. The B-52's adaptability extends far beyond its original design parameters. The aircraft proved it could deliver conventional weapons with devastating accuracy, operate in hostile electronic environments, absorb combat damage, and continue flying, sustain high operational tempos for years without catastrophic failure rates. Colonel James McCarthy, Anderson's wing commander, holds a briefing for his maintenance officers 3 days after the last combat mission. The briefing room is hot despite air conditioning that struggles against Guam's humidity. McCarthy stands before a chart showing B-52 fleet status. 347 aircraft remaining from the original 744 build. Some lost in combat. Others retired due to age or accident. But the majority still operational, still capable. SAC wants assessments, McCarthy says. Can these airframes continue flying? For how long? What modifications would extend service life? The questions reflect Pentagon uncertainty about the bomber's future. ICBMs now form the primary nuclear deterrent. Minuteman III missiles in hardened silos, each capable of delivering multiple warheads with accuracy measured in meters. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles at a second leg of the strategic triad, undetectable and invulnerable. Bombers represent the third leg, but many analysts argue they're the least essential. Yet retiring the B-52 fleet would eliminate America's only visible, flexible strategic weapon. Missiles launch or don't launch. Bombers can be deployed, recalled, repositioned. They can signal resolve without irrevocable commitment. And their conventional bombing capability, proven devastatingly effective in Vietnam, provides options beyond nuclear exchange. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, Air Force Systems Command engineers begin structural analysis of B-52 airframes. They X-ray wing spars, ultrasound fuselage joints, magnetic particle inspect critical load points. What they discover surprises them. Boeing's original structural margins remain largely intact. The airframes can fly thousands of additional hours if properly maintained. But maintenance is increasingly complex. Part suppliers have closed. Manufacturing tooling has been scrapped. The industrial base that produced B-52s in the 1950s no longer exists. Keeping the fleet flying will require reverse engineering components, qualifying alternative suppliers, developing entirely new logistics chains for aircraft built when Eisenhower was president. March 15, 1978. Engels Air Base, Soviet Union. Colonel Pavel Andrusov walked beneath the swept wings of a Tupolev Tu-160, NATO codename Blackjack, and sees the future of strategic aviation. The Tu-160 is supersonic, capable of Mach 2 at altitude. It incorporates variable geometry wings, advanced avionics, reduced radar cross-section. Everything the B-52 is not. The prototype flew in December 1981 in the original timeline, but development has been underway for years. Soviet designers are creating a bomber that will make all subsonic aircraft obsolete. The Tu-160 will fly faster, higher, and farther than American B-52s. It will carry cruise missiles beyond the range of defending interceptors. It will represent Soviet technological superiority over American stagnation. Or so the planning documents claim. What Andrusov notices, though he doesn't articulate it in official reports, is the complexity. The Tu-160 requires specialized maintenance, exotic materials, precision manufacturing tolerances that strain Soviet industrial capacity. Each aircraft will cost enormously more than existing bombers. Production rates will be limited by availability of titanium, advanced electronics, skilled technicians. The B-52, by contrast, is built from conventional aluminum alloys using 1950s manufacturing techniques. It's simple enough that field maintenance crews can perform major repairs. It's robust enough that battle damage rarely proves fatal. Its very obsolescence makes it practical. But Andrusov keeps these observations private. Soviet doctrine demands faith in technological advancement. Questioning whether simpler might be better invites political scrutiny. In America, the Carter administration debates defense spending amid economic malaise. The B-52 fleet continues its nuclear alert mission, but funding for major upgrades is limited. The aircraft limp forward on incremental improvements, better electronics here, structural reinforcement there. Nothing transformative, just enough to keep flying. Then, in November 1979, Iranian revolutionaries seized the American embassy in Tehran. The following month, Soviet forces invade Afghanistan. The Cold War, which had shown signs of thawing, freezes again. Defense spending increases. And suddenly, questions about retiring the B-52 fleet disappear. The bomber will fly because tensions demand it. Because ICBMs can't be repositioned for regional conflicts. Because visible deterrence still matters. Because after Vietnam, military planners understand that having conventional strategic bombing capacity provides options between doing nothing and launching nuclear weapons. The obsolete bomber, dismissed by Soviet generals and questioned by American analysts, survives by being useful in ways no one originally intended. It becomes the platform that adapts rather than the weapon that dominates. And in that adaptation, it finds longevity that purpose-built systems never achieve. At Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, young pilots who weren't born when the first B-52 flew now train to operate them. The aircraft their grandfathers flew now carries their generation into an uncertain future. January 28, 1981. Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. Captain Rachel Torres, one of the first female B-52 pilots, performs her pre-flight inspection in temperatures 40 degrees below zero. The cold makes metal brittle, hydraulic fluid sluggish, and human fingers numb even inside insulated gloves. Her aircraft, a B-52H model built in 1962, is older than she is. The crew chief, Technical Sergeant Raymond Foster, has maintained this specific bird for 6 years and treats it with the proprietary affection mechanics reserve for temperamental machines that nonetheless perform when needed. She's cold-soaked, Foster says, his breath condensing instantly. Start sequence might take extra time. Torres nods. She's flown B-52s for 2 years now, long enough to understand that each aircraft has individual quirks, peculiar behaviors that live somewhere between mechanical reality and crew superstition. This one, tail number 61-0036, tends to run hot on engine number 4 and requires extra coaxing during winter starts. The Cold War has intensified under Reagan. Defense spending is skyrocketing. SAC is expanding alert postures. And the B-52, written off as obsolete throughout the 1970s, is suddenly central to American strategy again. The new administration believes in peace through strength, which translates practically into more bombers on more runways, carrying more weapons at higher readiness states. In Moscow, General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev receives intelligence briefings showing increased American bomber activity. The reports note that B-52s are being retrofitted with cruise missiles, AGM-86 ALCMs that can be launched from hundreds of miles away from targets, flying below radar coverage, navigating via terrain-following systems to strike with nuclear warheads. This transforms the B-52 from a penetrating bomber that must reach its target into a standoff platform that never enters defended airspace. Soviet air defense planners, who spent decades optimizing systems to shoot down bombers approaching Soviet territory, suddenly face weapons launched from aircraft they cannot reach. The SA-2, SA-3, SA-5 missile systems that ring Soviet borders become less relevant when the threat launches from international airspace and approaches a treetop altitude. Marshal Nikolai Ogarkov, chief of the Soviet General Staff, files an assessment noting, "The American B-52, through modification rather than replacement, has evolved to counter our defensive investments. This suggests a platform-based approach to weapons development that our doctrine has not adequately addressed. The assessment is prescient but arrives too late to alter Soviet strategic planning. The USSR is committed to next-generation systems. The Tu-160 bomber, advanced ICBMs, satellite defense networks. Resources flow toward new programs while existing platforms receive minimal upgrades." June 10, 1982. Over the North Atlantic, Major Thomas Clancy pilots his B-52G through turbulence at 500 feet above storm-tossed seas. This is what the Strategic Air Command now calls penetration profile, flying low to avoid radar detection, using terrain and Earth's curvature to mask approach routes. The B-52 was designed to fly at 50,000 feet in smooth air. Flying it at 500 feet in rough weather is like driving a freight train through a residential neighborhood. Possible, but requiring complete concentration and producing enormous structural stress. The ride is punishing. Turbulence bounces the massive aircraft like a toy. The autopilot struggles to maintain altitude. Clancy and his co-pilot, Captain Jennifer Wu, hand-fly corrections constantly, fighting control yokes that require physical strength to move. Below deck, the navigator and bombardier brace themselves against instrument panels, trying to maintain situational awareness while being shaken continuously. This low-altitude profile is the Air Force's answer to improve Soviet radar and missile systems. If the B-52 can't fly over defenses, it will fly under them. The airframe is being stressed in ways Boeing's 1950s engineers never imagined, but structural testing shows the wings and fuselage can handle it. Barely, if flight hours are carefully tracked and fatigue-prone components are regularly replaced. What this means practically, the B-52 fleet is becoming expensive to maintain. Each flight hour at low altitude counts as 3 equivalent hours for structural fatigue purposes. Component failure rates increase. Inspection requirements multiply. Yet the aircraft continue flying because there's no replacement available and won't be for decades. At Boeing facilities in Seattle and Wichita, engineering teams work on service life extension programs. They analyze metal fatigue, corrosion patterns, structural crack propagation. They develop reinforcement modifications, replacement parts specifications, inspection protocols. They're essentially reverse engineering their own 30-year-old aircraft to understand how to keep them flying another 30 years. The B-1B Lancer, America's next-generation bomber, is under development, but production won't begin until 1984 and full operational capability won't arrive until the late 1980s. Even then, only 100 will be built. The B-52 fleet of 347 aircraft cannot be replaced quickly or cheaply. So the Stratofortress soldiers on, upgraded incrementally, maintained obsessively, flown by crews who understand they're operating aircraft older than their parents. In Soviet planning documents, the B-52 is still described as obsolete. But the descriptions now include caveats about cruise missile capabilities, low-altitude penetration profiles, conventional bombing capacity. The obsolete bomber keeps adapting, and each adaptation requires Soviet countermeasures, and those countermeasures consume resources that might otherwise go elsewhere. The war of attrition isn't fought with bullets. It's fought with maintenance schedules and upgrade budgets and operational flexibility. And the B-52, improbably, is winning it. August 23, 1985. Ramstein Air Base, West Germany. Colonel Frank Weber watches Soviet military aircraft through binoculars during a NATO exercise and notices something his intelligence briefings haven't emphasized. The aircraft look tired. Paint is faded. Maintenance appears rushed. The formations lack the crisp precision he remembers from earlier years. Weber has been stationed in Europe for 6 years, observing Soviet forces across the Iron Curtain, and the cumulative small observations suggest something larger. The USSR is struggling. American intelligence agencies are documenting Soviet economic decline, but the implications for military hardware take time to manifest. Aircraft require spare parts. Spare parts require functioning supply chains. Supply chains require industrial capacity and economic resources. When economies contract, militaries deteriorate, and the deterioration starts with maintenance and readiness long before it shows up in order of battle assessments. Meanwhile, B-52s continue their missions with increasing sophistication. The offensive avionics system upgrade provides digital computers replacing 1950s analog systems. The aircraft receive improved electronic warfare suites, better navigation systems, advanced communication equipment. Each upgrade extends capability without requiring new airframes. At Dyess Air Force Base in Texas, maintenance crews strip ancient wiring from a B-52H and install modern digital bus systems. The work is painstaking, every wire traced, every connection verified, every system tested. But when complete, the aircraft has computational power that would have seemed science fiction when it first flew. Technical Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, an avionics technician, reflects on the irony. We're putting 1980s computers into a 1960s airframe designed with 1950s technology. And it works. It works because the fundamental platform is sound. The structure is robust. The engines are reliable. Everything else, sensors, weapons, navigation, communication, can be upgraded incrementally as technology advances. This is the unintended genius of the B-52. It's sufficiently simple that modernization doesn't require complete redesign. December 8, 1987. Engels Air Base, Soviet Union. Lieutenant Colonel Dmitry Volkov files his monthly readiness report and stares at numbers that depress him. His bomber regiment operates 295s and 216s, aircraft roughly contemporary with the B-52. But maintenance has deteriorated dramatically. Parts are chronically unavailable. Qualified technicians are leaving military service for civilian jobs. Training hours are cut due to fuel shortages. Aircraft sit grounded awaiting components that never arrive. Volkov's report notes that only 40% of his assigned aircraft are combat-ready at any given time. This is down from 75% 3 years ago. The trend is clear and alarming. Yet when he submits the report through proper channels, the response is perfunctory acknowledgement and instructions to do better with available resources. The Soviet military is calcifying. Sclerotic leadership resists acknowledging problems. Economic stagnation prevents solutions. And the arms race with America, sustained for 40 years through sheer force of will and centralized resource allocation, is becoming unsustainable. In America, B-52 crews fly training missions, participate in exercises, maintain alert postures. The aircraft are aging, but systematic upgrades and maintenance keep them operational. The contrast with Soviet bomber forces grows starker yearly. What's happening isn't dramatic collapse, but gradual erosion. The USSR isn't defeated militarily. It's exhausting itself economically. And one small measure of that exhaustion, Soviet bombers, designed to match or exceed American capabilities, are increasingly unable to maintain operational readiness while their American counterparts continue flying. March 15, 1988. Pentagon, Washington, D.C. Air Force Chief of Staff General Larry Welch presents the Service Life Extension Program to Congressional Appropriations Committees. The briefing includes structural analysis, cost projections, capability assessments. The bottom line: B-52s can fly until 2040 if properly maintained and upgraded. The airframes have sufficient fatigue life. The platform can accommodate new weapons, sensors, and systems. The cost of keeping them flying is substantially less than developing and building replacements. Congressman Howard Bennett from California asks the obvious question: wasn't this aircraft supposed to be obsolete 30 years ago? Welch smiles slightly. Yes, sir, and it's been obsolete ever since. But it's useful obsolescence. The phrase captures something essential. The B-52 survives not by being cutting edge, but by being adaptable. It doesn't dominate any single performance metric, speed, altitude, stealth, range, but it provides sufficient capability across multiple metrics while remaining economically sustainable and operationally flexible. Soviet design philosophy emphasizes maximum performance in specific parameters. American design philosophy, at least accidentally with the B-52, emphasizes adaptable adequacy. And in a long competition, adaptable adequacy proves more sustainable than maximum performance. In Moscow, Mikhail Gorbachev's glasnost and perestroika policies are revealing the depth of Soviet economic problems. Military spending consumes 15 to 17% of GDP, possibly more if hidden costs are included. This level is unsustainable. Something must give. The American B-52, meanwhile, consumes a modest portion of the Air Force budget. It's not glamorous. It doesn't feature in propaganda films, but it flies its missions, carries its weapons, and provides strategic capability at a cost the nation can sustain indefinitely. The bomber the Soviets mocked in the 1950s is outlasting their economy. The aircraft dismissed as obsolete is proving more enduring than the political system that dismissed it. And while this irony won't become fully apparent until the USSR collapses, the underlying dynamic is already in motion. Attrition in the Cold War isn't measured in battles fought, but in capabilities sustained. And the B-52, improbably, remains sustained. November 9, 1989. Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana. Major Kevin Harrison sits in the alert facility watching CNN footage of East Germans climbing the Berlin Wall, hammering at concrete with whatever tools they can find, and realizes he's witnessing the end of the world he's trained for his entire career. The alert klaxon hasn't sounded. His B-52H sits on the ramp with weapons loaded, ready to launch towards Soviet targets he's memorized but never expected to actually strike. And now, in real time on television, the Cold War is ending not with nuclear exchange, but with people dancing on fortifications. The alert phone rings. Not the red phone that signals actual nuclear launch orders. That phone has never rung, not once in Harrison's 6 years of alert duty. This is the ordinary line connecting to wing operations. The voice on the other end is Colonel Patricia Mendez, the wing commander. Stand down from alert posture, she says. Return weapons to storage. This is not a drill. Harrison feels something between relief and disorientation. Everything he's trained for, the mission that justified the B-52's existence since 1955, is suddenly irrelevant. The Soviet targets in his navigation computer, the strike plans rehearsed monthly, the authentication codes memorized and verified, all of it belongs to a world that's ending on live television. But the B-52s don't disappear with the Berlin Wall. January 17, 1991. Al Jaber Air Base, Kuwait, Iraqi occupied. Captain Rashid Al-Zarani of the Iraqi Air Force watches radar returns, showing American bomber formations approaching from the south, and calculates that his MiG-29 cannot intercept them. The bombers are flying at 40,000 feet, beyond his aircraft's practical combat ceiling, and they're launching weapons from ranges his missiles cannot reach. Iraq's air defense system, built with Soviet equipment and doctrine, is optimized for different threats, different tactics. When the bombs begin falling on Baghdad, al-Zahrani is 200 miles away, his MiG grounded due to fuel shortages and the systematic destruction of Iraqi command and control. He will later learn that many of those strikes came from B-52s, aircraft designed in the 1940s, built in the 1950s, flying missions in 1991 with precision that makes decade and design irrelevant. Operation Desert Storm reveals the B-52's post-Cold War relevance. The aircraft flies 1,624 sorties in 43 days, dropping 72,000 bombs, 25,700 tons of ordnance. Some missions involve conventional carpet bombing of Iraqi Republican Guard positions. Others use precision-guided munitions delivered from high altitude. The flexibility that kept B-52s relevant during Vietnam proves equally valuable in this new conflict. Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Mitchell pilots her B-52G on the war's third night, launching 12 AGM-86C conventional cruise missiles at Iraqi command bunkers near Basra. Each missile costs $1.45 million and carries a 3,000-pound high-explosive warhead. Her aircraft never enters Iraqi airspace, launching from over Saudi Arabia and returning without incident. The targets are destroyed with precision that strategic bombing in World War II couldn't have imagined. What Desert Storm demonstrates conclusively: the B-52 has evolved from nuclear delivery platform into flexible conventional bomber capable of missions ranging from mass saturation bombing to precision strike. This versatility ensures the aircraft's survival past the Cold War's end. December 26, 1991. Moscow, Soviet Union. The Soviet flag is lowered from the Kremlin for the final time at 7:32 p.m. Mikhail Gorbachev has resigned. The USSR officially ceases to exist. 15 new nations emerge from the ruins, inheriting fragments of military might that once rivaled America's. The strategic rocket forces are divided among successor states. The bomber forces become property of Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, nations without resources to maintain them properly. At Engels Air Base, now in the Russian Federation, Colonel Dmitry Volkov, still serving, though his rank seems less meaningful with each passing month, watches Tu-95 sit idle on the ramp. No fuel for training flights. No parts for maintenance. No budget for operations. The fleet that was supposed to outlast American bombers is instead outlasted by the collapse of the state that built them. The B-52, designed to bomb the Soviet Union into oblivion, has survived its intended target. In America, defense analysts debate the peace dividend. The Cold War is over. Military spending should decrease. Forces should be reduced. But even as the B-52 fleet shrinks, some aircraft retired, others placed in storage, the core force remains operational. Air Combat Command keeps 94 B-52HS in active service, reasoning that their conventional bombing capability provides options for regional conflicts in an uncertain post-Cold War world. The reasoning proves correct within months. Iraq, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Kosovo. Each conflict finds B-52s adapted to new missions, new tactics, new requirements. The aircraft survives Soviet collapse because it proves useful beyond the Soviet threat. At Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma, depot maintenance crews perform extensive overhauls on B-52s, replacing wing sections, upgrading avionics, installing new radar systems. The work is meticulous and expensive, but cost analysis shows that maintaining existing aircraft is far cheaper than developing replacements. Senior Master Sergeant Robert Chun, whose father flew B-52s in Vietnam, supervises a wing replacement on aircraft 60-0058. My dad worked on these, he tells younger technicians. Probably this exact bird. And someone's son will work on them after I retire. He's correct, though he doesn't know how correct. The B-52 will outlast not just the Soviet Union, but multiple subsequent conflicts, numerous supposed replacement programs, and entire generations of military personnel. The bomber dismissed as obsolete in the 1950s is still flying in the 2020s, long after the nation that mocked it has dissolved into history. September 11th, 2001. Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Richardson is conducting routine flight training when the alert comes through her headset. All aircraft return to base immediately. No explanation, just the urgency in the controller's voice that signals something catastrophic. She lands her B-52H 20 minutes later and learns that America is under attack. Not from Soviet missiles, not from enemy bombers, but from hijacked civilian airliners flown into buildings by terrorists. Within hours, every combat-coded B-52 in the inventory is generating for deployment. The enemy isn't a nation-state with fixed targets and known locations. It's a network terrorist organization hiding in Afghan mountains. And the B-52, designed to obliterate Soviet cities with nuclear weapons, is about to become America's primary close air support platform in a counterinsurgency war. The adaptability that saved the aircraft from obsolescence during Vietnam and the Gulf War now saves it again. Within weeks, B-52s are orbiting over Afghanistan, working with special operations forces on the ground, dropping precision-guided munitions on Taliban positions based on coordinates radioed from soldiers who weren't born when these aircraft first flew. October 19th, 2001. Over Afghanistan, Captain Marcus Webb's B-52H circles at 25,000 feet above the Hindu Kush Mountains, waiting for targeting coordinates from a special forces team somewhere in the valleys below. His bombardier, Captain Lisa Torres, monitors multiple data links simultaneously: radio communications with ground forces, satellite targeting feeds, intelligence updates, weapons status displays. The bomber carries 16 2,000-pound DAMs, joint direct attack munitions, GPS-guided bombs that transform the 1950s aircraft into a precision strike platform. Viper 3-2. This is Reaper, Torres hears through her headset. The voice is calm despite whatever situation is developing on the ground. Taliban convoy moving east through grid, November Bravo 7-4. Request immediate strike. Torres inputs the coordinates. The targeting computer, a system installed during 1990s upgrades, calculates release parameters. Webb adjusts the aircraft's position. 18 seconds later, a single JDAM releases from the bomb bay, falling silently through thin air before its guidance fins activate, steering toward coordinates precise to within 13 meters. The explosion, when it comes, is not visible from their altitude, but the radio confirmation arrives quickly. Good hit, good hit. Target destroyed. This is not what Boeing's engineers imagined in 1952. This is not what Curtis LeMay planned when he demanded a strategic bomber fleet. But this is what the B-52 has become: a flexible platform for whatever mission emerges. The terrorist war, like Vietnam before it, proves that strategic bombers can perform tactical missions, that Cold War weapons can address 21st century threats. March 19th, 2003. Diego Garcia. The B-52's launch toward Iraq for the second time in 12 years. But this war is different from Desert Storm. The Iraqi military is weaker, the opposition lighter, the mission's more focused on supporting ground forces than strategic bombardment. Major Jeremy Foster flies his aircraft north toward Basra, carrying a mixed load of precision weapons and older dumb bombs, ready to strike whatever targets emerge during the 8-hour mission. The aircraft he's flying, tail number 60-0034, was built in June 1962. It's older than his parents. The maintenance records show it's accumulated over 19,000 flight hours and undergone 4 major depot overhauls. Sections of wing structure have been replaced. The cockpit instruments are entirely different from original configuration. The engines are third-generation turbofans installed during 1980s modifications. Yet it flies reliably, carries its weapons accurately, performs its mission as designed. The paradox of the B-52: everything has been replaced except the basic airframe, but it remains recognizably the same aircraft. Like the philosophical ship of Theseus, where every plank gets replaced over time. Is it still the same ship? Is this still a 1962 bomber? Or is it a continuously updated weapons platform that merely looks like its ancestor. Foster doesn't ponder philosophy. He monitors instruments, follows procedures, and drops precision weapons on coordinates provided by Joint Terminal Attack Controllers directing the ground war below. 20 minutes after releasing his last bomb, he turns south toward Diego Garcia. Mission complete, already knowing he'll fly again tomorrow night. June 15, 2006. Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. Colonel David Chun addresses a congressional delegation visiting to evaluate Air Force programs. The delegation wants to know why B-52s are still flying, why the Air Force hasn't replaced them with modern aircraft, why taxpayers continue funding bombers designed before some congressmen were born. Chun presents charts showing cost analysis, capability assessments, operational tempo. The numbers tell a clear story. The B-52 costs $70,000 per flight hour to operate, expensive but far less than developing new bombers. The airframe life has been extended to 2040 through structural modifications. And no other aircraft in the inventory provides equivalent payload capacity, loiter time, and weapons flexibility. The B-52 remains relevant, Chun explains, because we keep making it relevant. Every upgrade, every modification, every new weapon integration extends its useful life. We're not flying 1950s bombers. We're flying continuously modernized platforms that happen to use 1950s airframes. Representative Mitchell from Oregon asks the question that summarizes everything. When does it finally become obsolete? Chun pauses before answering. When we stop adapting it to new missions, which we haven't done yet. The unstated answer, probably never. The B-52 has achieved immortality through usefulness. Each new conflict finds new missions. Each technological advancement enables new capabilities. The aircraft survives by evolving while remaining fundamentally itself. August 17, 2016. Al Udeid Air Base, Qatar. Captain Jessica Ramirez climbs into 8B-52H for her 73rd combat mission against ISIS targets in Syria and Iraq. She's 29 years old. The aircraft, tail number 60-0053, is 54 years old, nearly twice her age. Her grandfather flew B-52s in Vietnam. Her father flew them during Desert Storm. She's the third generation of her family to operate the same aircraft type, possibly the same physical airframe, given the small fleet size and long service lives. The mission brief covers multiple potential targets across northern Iraq. ISIS has dispersed into small cells, avoiding fixed positions that strategic bombers traditionally engaged. But the B-52's ability to carry diverse weapons loads and loiter for hours makes it ideal for dynamic targeting. Ramirez's bomber carries 20 GBU, 38 DAMs, and 12 GBU-31s, 500-pound and 2,000-pound precision-guided bombs that can be individually programmed and released against targets of opportunity. Reaper 3-1, this is Jaguar. Her radio crackles 3 hours into the mission. The voice belongs to a Joint Terminal Attack Controller embedded with Iraqi security forces near Mosul. We have ISIS technical vehicles moving toward friendly positions. Grid November Delta 4782. Request immediate strike. Ramirez's weapons systems officer, Captain Ryan Mitchell, inputs the coordinates into the targeting computer. The system, installed during the conventional mission upgrade program in the 1990s, integrates GPS, laser designation, and synthetic aperture radar into a digital fire control solution. Mitchell selects 2 GBU-38s, programs their impact coordinates, and clears them for release. Jaguar, Reaper 3-1, 2 away. The dams fall for 90 seconds before impacting. The radio confirms, direct hits. Targets destroyed. Outstanding work. This is the B-52's modern reality. Not apocalyptic nuclear strikes, but precision conventional warfare, supporting ground forces with weapons that didn't exist when the aircraft first flew, fighting enemies using tactics that Cold War planners never imagined. December 2nd, 2018. Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana. Lieutenant General David Nahum, commanding Air Force Global Strike Command, reviews the latest B-52 B-52 Service Life Extension Study. The analysis is comprehensive: structural testing, economic modeling, capability projections. The conclusion is startling even to Nahum, who spent 30 years around these aircraft. The B-52H fleet can fly until 2050, with additional modifications, potentially until 2060. That would mean B-52s serving for 105 years from first flight, an unprecedented longevity for military aircraft. The study notes that maintaining the fleet requires continuous investment, re-winging programs, engine replacements, avionics upgrades, radar modernization. But the total cost remains less than developing and fielding replacement bombers. General Nahum approves the Commercial Engine Replacement Program, an initiative to replace the aircraft's 8 TF-33 engines with 4 modern Rolls-Royce F-130 engines. The new engines will provide 30% better fuel efficiency, reduce maintenance costs, and extend range. Installation begins in 2021. The irony isn't lost on anyone. Installing 21st-century engines on 1960s airframes and expecting decades of additional service. Meanwhile, Russia, the successor state to the Soviet Union that mocked the B-52's obsolescence, continues flying Tu-95 bombers built during the same era. Both nations discovered the same truth: well-designed airframes with sufficient structural margins can be upgraded indefinitely. The platform matters more than the systems, because systems can be replaced while structures cannot. January 23, 2020. Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. Staff Sergeant Aaron Kim, a 22-year-old crew chief, performs post-flight inspection on a B-52H that just returned from a long-duration training mission. He climbs into the wheel well, flashlight illuminating structural components that were manufactured before his grandparents met. The metal shows age, slight corrosion here, minor fatigue cracking there, but nothing that threatens airworthiness. Regular inspections catch problems before they become critical. Kim's technical orders manual is digital, displayed on a tablet computer that contains more processing power than every B-52 avionics system combined when these aircraft first flew. He documents his inspection electronically, uploading findings to maintenance databases that track every component's history across decades. The bomber he's inspecting has 20,000 flight hours, equivalent to nearly 3 years of continuous flight. How much longer can these things fly? Asks Airman First Class Jennifer Lopez, new to the maintenance career field. Kim considers the question. They say 2050, but honestly, as long as we keep fixing them. The airframes are solid. Everything else is replaceable. This is the unglamorous reality of military aviation. Not dramatic combat missions, but endless maintenance, continuous inspection, relentless attention to detail that keeps aging aircraft safely airborne. The B-52 survives not through technological superiority, but through maintenance, discipline, and engineering conservatism that built strength margins sufficient for a century of service. October 22, 2022. Over the Black Sea, Major Christopher Hayes pilots his B-52H through international airspace, tracking close enough to Ukrainian borders that Russian air defense systems certainly detect them. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has renewed Cold War tensions, and the B-52's symbolic value has returned. The aircraft represents American strategic reach, the ability to deliver overwhelming force anywhere globally, the reminder that NATO possesses capabilities Russia cannot match. Hayes doesn't carry weapons on this mission. It's a show of force flight, demonstrating support for Ukraine without direct engagement. But Russian commanders watching on radar know these same aircraft could be loaded with cruise missiles within hours, could strike targets across Russia with precision that Soviet-era defenses cannot reliably counter. The obsolete bomber remains relevant through sheer persistence. It survived its original enemy. It adapted to new conflicts. It continues flying through engineering discipline and operational flexibility. And it shows no signs of final retirement, no indication that a century of service represents any natural endpoint. March 7, 2023. Moscow, Russian Federation. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu watches video footage of American B-52s conducting exercises near Russian airspace and experiences something close to historical vertigo. His ministry files contain declassified Soviet documents from the 1950s, intelligence assessments dismissing the B-52 as transitional technology, propaganda pieces mocking American reliance on obsolete bombers, planning documents that assumed manned aircraft would be irrelevant by 1970. Those documents are now 70 years old. The B-52 is still flying. Meanwhile, Russia's own bomber fleet struggles with serviceability issues. The Tu-95 Bears, contemporary with the B-52, remain operational but in reduced numbers and degraded readiness. The Tu-160 Blackjacks, the supersonic bombers meant to render all subsonic aircraft obsolete, exist in limited quantities due to manufacturing complexity and cost. Russia has announced plans to restart Tu-160 production, but building 1980s-era aircraft in the 2020s only emphasizes the difficulty of developing genuinely modern bombers. Colonel Yevgeny Baranov, assigned to analyze American strategic aviation capabilities, files a report that his superiors find uncomfortable. The report's thesis: the United States achieved strategic bomber sustainability through platform longevity and incremental modernization. The Soviet approach of periodic replacement with next-generation systems proved economically unsustainable. We are now decades behind in systematic capability development. The report circulates but produces no policy changes. Russia lacks resources to replicate American systematic upgrade programs. The economic model that exhausted the Soviet Union continues constraining the Russian Federation. And American B-52s, dismissed by Khrushchev and Brezhnev, continue flying over borders Russia cannot adequately defend. June 14, 2023. Fairchild Air Force Base, Washington. Technical Sergeant Maria Santos oversees installation of a new radar modernization program equipment into B-52 H-tail number 61-0007. The old AN/ASQ 151 electro-optical viewing system is being replaced with an advanced AESA radar that provides synthetic aperture mapping, ground-moving target indication, and air-to-air search capabilities. The upgrade transforms the bomber's sensor suite from 1990s technology to cutting-edge 2020s capability. Santos has worked B-52 maintenance for 8 years. She's seen the aircraft receive new radars, new communication systems, new defensive countermeasures, new weapons integration. Each upgrade extends operational relevance another decade. The aircraft she's working on was built in December 1962, 61 years ago. By the time this radar system becomes obsolete and requires replacement, the airframe will be 80 years old. Does it feel weird? Asks Airman Chun, assisting with the installation, putting new equipment into something this old? Santos considers the question while torquing connector bolts to specification. Not really. The age is just the airframe. Everything that makes it actually function, sensors, weapons, computers, that's all modern. Think of it like restoring a classic car, but giving it an electric motor and self-driving capability. The analogy is imperfect, but captures something essential. The B-52 has become a platform rather than a complete weapon system. The platform provides stable flight characteristics, enormous payload capacity, and structural integrity. Everything else is modular, replaceable, upgradable. This approach, continuous modernization of existing platforms rather than complete replacement, represents an accidental strategic victory. The Air Force didn't plan for B-52s to fly a century. But conservative design, substantial structural margins, and incremental upgrade programs created longevity that purpose-built next-generation systems never achieved. September 30th, 2024. Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana. Colonel Jennifer Mitchell, now commanding the 2nd Bomb Wing, briefs her aircrew on the new Hypersonic Attack Cruise Missile Integration Program. The AGM-183 RRW, Air-Launched Rapid Response Weapon, will give B-52s the ability to strike targets with hypersonic missiles traveling Mach 5+, reaching objectives in minutes rather than hours. The 70-year-old bomber will carry weapons representing the cutting edge of 21st century technology. The Buff becomes a hypersonic platform. Mitchell tells her crews, using the affectionate nickname, Big Ugly Fat Fucker, that aircrew have used for decades. Same airframe, different century, different mission set, but still delivering. Her pilots, some young enough to be her children, struggle to conceptualize the timeline. The aircraft they fly were built when John F. Kennedy was president, when computers filled rooms, when moon landings were future fantasy. Yet these same aircraft now carry GPS-guided weapons, communicate via satellite links, integrate with network-centric warfare systems, and soon will launch hypersonic missiles. Lieutenant Jake Rodriguez raises his hand. Ma'am, when do these actually retire? Mitchell smiles. Current timeline says 2050, but we've been saying just a few more years since 1975. The honest answer? When the airframes literally cannot fly anymore, which keeps not happening. She doesn't mention the deeper truth. Military bureaucracy struggles to develop replacement systems. The B-21 Raider, America's next-generation stealth bomber, is entering service, but production numbers remain limited and costs are astronomical. The Air Force will build perhaps 100 B-21s over the next 2 decades. The B-52 fleet of 76 aircraft cannot be quickly replaced. So the Stratofortress continues, upgraded endlessly, flying missions that designers never imagined against threats that didn't exist when the aircraft first flew. December 15th, 2024. Over the Pacific Ocean, Captain Emma Torres pilots her B-52H during exercises with Japanese and Australian forces, demonstrating strategic bomber integration in Pacific theater operations. China's military expansion has revitalized the bomber's deterrent role. The ability to strike targets across vast oceanic distances, to maintain continuous presence through aerial refueling, to carry weapons loads measured in tens of tons. These capabilities remain strategically relevant despite the aircraft's age. Torres thinks about her great-grandfather, who served in World War II. He would have been 23 when the B-52 first flew. Now she's 27, flying that same aircraft design and expecting to complete a 20-year career without seeing its retirement. 4 generations spanning a single weapons platform. Unprecedented, absurd, yet real. The aircraft continues because killing it requires admitting that replacement is unaffordable, that modern combat aircraft cost billions per unit, that maintaining existing platforms is economically rational even when those platforms are older than most nations. February 8th, 2025. National Museum of the United States Air Force, Ohio. Major Thomas Wright stands beside a B-52D on static display. Tail number 56-0676, painted in Vietnam War-era camouflage, and explains to a group of high school students that aircraft identical to this museum piece are still flying combat missions. The students look skeptical. This bomber has aluminum skin, exposed rivets, analog instruments visible through the cockpit windows. It looks like it belongs in a history book, not operational service. The ones still flying have been upgraded, Wright explains. New engines, new radar, new computers. But the basic airframe? Same design. Your grandparents' generation flew these. Your parents' generation flew these. And some of you might fly them if you join the Air Force. A student raises her hand. Why don't we build new ones? It's the question that summarizes 70 years of military aviation economics. Wright considers how to explain Cold War procurement decisions, post-Vietnam defense budgets, the cancellation of the B-70 Valkyrie, the limited production of the B-1B, the long development of the B-2 Spirit, the slow rollout of the B-21 Raider. How to explain that building bombers costs tens of billions, that Congress funds incremental upgrades more readily than revolutionary replacements, that institutional inertia favors maintaining existing systems over developing new ones. Because, he finally says, these still work. And sometimes working is more important than being new. April 22nd, 2025. Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana. The commercial engine replacement program reaches a milestone when B-52 H-tail number 60-0040 completes its first flight, with 4 Rolls-Royce F-130 engines replacing the original 8 TF-33s. Captain Laura Chin pilots the test flight, with Boeing engineers monitoring every parameter: thrust output, fuel consumption, vibration signatures, exhaust temperatures. The new engines transform the aircraft's performance. Fuel efficiency improves by 30%, extending unrefueled range from 8,800 miles to nearly 12,000. Maintenance requirements decrease dramatically. Modern engines with advanced materials and design require less frequent servicing than 1960s turbofans. The bomber gains additional payload capacity since fewer engines mean less weight and drag. Chun banks the aircraft through test maneuvers, feeling responsiveness that the old configuration never provided. With 4 engines instead of 8, throttle inputs are more precise. Engine-out emergencies become less critical. Losing one of 4 engines is less catastrophic than losing one of 8. The aircraft feels, paradoxically, both more modern and more manageable. It's smoother, she reports over radio. Quieter. The power-to-weight ratio is noticeably better. Boeing's lead engineer, Dr. Richard Paulson, watches telemetry data and realizes they've essentially created a new aircraft while keeping the old airframe. The engine replacement program costs $2.56 billion across the entire 76 aircraft fleet, approximately $34 million per bomber. Building new aircraft would cost $3 to $4 billion each. The economic logic is irrefutable. Extensive modification of existing platforms is vastly cheaper than complete replacement. This is the B-52's survival mechanism revealed in purest form. Spend millions to save billions. Accept that the airframe is fundamentally sound and everything else is negotiable. July 3, 2025. Over Syria. Major Carlos Mendez orbits his B-52H at 32,000 feet, providing close air support to coalition ground forces fighting ISIS remnants near Deir ez-Zor. His weapons bay carries GBU-38s, GBU-31s, and AGM-158 JSSM cruise missiles, a mixed load allowing engagement of targets from close-in precision strikes to standoff attacks beyond visual range. The mission profile is identical to countless sorties flown over Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria since 2001. Reaper 5.6, this is Longbow, the radio crackles. Multiple enemy fighters in fortified positions, grid Papa Quebec 7-9. Request precision strike. Mendez's weapons systems officer, Captain Rachel Kim, inputs coordinates and selects 2 GBU-38s. The weapons release cleanly, their GPS guidance kits steering them toward impact points accurate within meters. The strike eliminates the threat without collateral damage to nearby civilian structures. Precision that would have been impossible in the B-52's early decades, but is now routine. This is not how Cold War strategists imagined using strategic bombers, but it's how modern warfare actually employs them. Persistent presence, flexible weapons loads, immediate response to ground force requirements. The B-52 survived into the 21st century by becoming something its designers never intended: a flying weapons truck capable of carrying whatever ordnance emerging threats require. October 18, 2025. Edwards Air Force Base, California. Almost exactly 73 years after the first flight, test pilot Colonel Sarah Henderson lands a B-52H after evaluating the final configuration of upgrades. New engines, new radar, new electronic warfare systems, new communication suite, new weapons integration. The aircraft that touches down is recognizably the same design that Guy Townsend flew in 1952, but literally every system except the basic airframe structure has been replaced, upgraded, or modernized. In the debriefing room, Henderson reviews flight test data with Air Force and Boeing engineers. The metrics are extraordinary. The aircraft meets or exceeds every performance parameter required for missions projected through 2050. Fuel efficiency rivals modern aircraft. Weapons capacity surpasses most bombers. Loiter time remains unmatched. The platform works because Boeing's 1940s engineers built strength margins sufficient to accommodate 7 decades of modifications they couldn't possibly have foreseen. The buff, Henderson tells the assembled engineers and officers, will outlive everyone in this room. It's not hyperbole. The youngest person present is 22 years old. The current retirement timeline extends to 2050, 25 years away. And everyone understands that 2050 is merely the latest estimate in a series of perpetually postponed retirement dates stretching back to 1975. Lieutenant General James Slife, commanding Air Force Global Strike Command, addresses the group. We're operating aircraft older than our grandparents. We'll maintain them as long as they're effective and affordable, which appears to be indefinitely. The statement reflects acceptance of reality that would have seemed absurd in 1952, unlikely in 1975, surprising in 2000, and is now simply acknowledged truth. The B-52 has achieved functional immortality through continuous adaptation. It survives not by being superior, but by being sufficient, upgradable, and cheaper than alternatives. October 25, 2025. Russian Central Archives, Moscow. Dr. Alexei Konstantin, a military historian granted access to newly declassified Soviet documents, reads through intelligence assessments from the 1950s and 60s with growing fascination. The files contain report after report dismissing the B-52 as obsolete technology, predictions that American reliance on manned bombers would prove strategically disastrous, calculations demonstrating that Soviet missiles would render strategic aviation irrelevant by 1970. Every prediction was wrong. One memo, dated April 1958 and authored by Marshal Pavel Rotmistrov, is particularly striking. The B-52 represents the final gasp of an obsolete strategic concept. Within 10 years, ICBMs will make such aircraft as relevant as cavalry in modern warfare. American investment in these bombers is a strategic mistake we should encourage. Konstantin photographs the document for his research. The irony is profound. Soviet military leadership actively wanted America to keep building B-52s, believing they represented wasteful spending on outdated systems. Yet those supposedly obsolete bombers outlasted the Soviet Union itself and continued flying 3 decades after the USSR's collapse. What Soviet planners failed to understand, Konstantin realizes as he reads through hundreds of similar assessments, was the difference between platforms and systems. They viewed the B-52 as a complete weapons system, frozen in time, incapable of evolution. They never grasped that American military-industrial philosophy treated aircraft as platforms capable of indefinite modification. The Soviets built next-generation systems to replace previous generations. Americans built adaptable platforms and continuously upgraded them. In a 1973 memo, General Alexei Yepeshev wrote, "American continued reliance on B-52 bombers demonstrates their technological stagnation and inability to develop modern systems." Yet by 1973, those bombers were carrying precision-guided weapons, sophisticated electronic warfare systems, and cruise missiles, capabilities Soviet planners hadn't anticipated because they assumed the airframe itself was the limitation. The strategic error cost the Soviet Union immeasurably. Resources poured into developing replacement bomber systems. The Tu-22M, Tu-160, various canceled programs, while the B-52 fleet received incremental upgrades at fraction of the cost. The Soviet economic model couldn't sustain continuous replacement cycles. The American model of platform longevity proved far more economically sustainable. November 3, 2025. Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri. Colonel Patricia Morales conducts a joint briefing with B-2 Spirit and B-52H crews, discussing complementary capabilities in future conflict scenarios. The B-2 America's stealth bomber, introduced in 1993, was supposed to replace the B-52. Instead, both aircraft serve side by side, each fulfilling different mission requirements. The B-2 excels at penetrating advanced air defenses, striking high-value targets in contested environments. But America built only 21 B-2s due to staggering costs. Each aircraft cost approximately $2.2 billion in 1997 dollars. The small fleet means limited availability, specialized mission profiles, and cautious deployment patterns. You don't risk a $2 billion aircraft on routine missions. The B-52, conversely, is comparatively expendable, not disposable. Each aircraft still represents significant investment, but operationally flexible enough to use for missions that don't require stealth. Cargo interdiction, show of force patrols, close air support, maritime surveillance, conventional bombing against non-peer adversaries. The missions that constitute 90% of actual air operations rather than high-end contingency planning. The B-2 is a scalpel, Morales explains. Precise, specialized, expensive. The Buff is a sledgehammer, crude by comparison, but effective across wider mission sets, and sustainable through extended operations. We need both, but we'll always need more sledgehammers and scalpels. Her B-52 pilots nod understanding. They know their aircraft lack stealth, can't penetrate advanced air defenses, won't survive against peer adversaries in contested airspace. But they also know that most conflicts don't involve peer adversaries. Most missions don't require penetrating advanced defenses, and operational sustainability matters as much as technological superiority. The B-21 Raider, the Air Force's newest stealth bomber, will eventually replace some B-52 missions. But production numbers remain limited by cost. The Air Force plans to build 100 B-21s over 20 years. That won't replace the 76 B-52HS currently operational, especially given that operational tempo requires more aircraft to maintain continuous presence. December 1st, 2025. Dyess Air Force Base, Texas. Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez performs routine structural inspection on B-52 H-tail number 60-0026, checking for metal fatigue in wing attachment points. He uses ultrasonic testing equipment that didn't exist when this aircraft was built, searching for microscopic cracks that could propagate into structural failures. Modern inspection technology allows detection of problems decades before they become critical. The wing spar he's inspecting is original 1961 manufacturing, 64 years old. Metal fatigue is inevitable with that age and flight hours. But Boeing's engineers built substantial safety margins into structural design. Where civilian aircraft might be designed for 30,000 flight cycles, the B-52 was overbuilt for nuclear war scenarios that required absorbing combat damage and continuing mission. That overbuilding now provides strength margins that enable continued operations far beyond intended service life. Rodriguez finds minor cracking in a non-critical area, logs it for monitoring, and moves to the next inspection point. The crack will be tracked during subsequent inspections. If it grows beyond allowable limits, that section will be reinforced or replaced. But likely the crack will stabilize, will remain within tolerance, and this wing spar will continue carrying loads for another decade or two. How much longer can these things actually fly? Asks Airman Lopez, assisting with the inspection. Rodriguez has been asked this question dozens of times. His answer evolves. The airframes are good until 2050, officially. But I've seen the engineering studies. With wing replacement programs and continued inspection protocols, they could fly until 2070, maybe longer. The structure isn't the limitation anymore. It's whether we have missions that require them and budgets to maintain them. Both conditions seem perpetually satisfied. Missions keep emerging: counterterrorism, great power competition, regional contingencies. Budgets keep flowing because maintaining existing aircraft costs less than developing replacements. The cycle continues indefinitely, and the B-52 flies on through sheer institutional inertia and economic logic. The bomber that Soviet generals mock survives because it's too useful to retire and too expensive to replace. Obsolescence, it turns out, is relative. And sometimes the obsolete outlast the cutting edge through simple persistence. January 15th, 2026. Boeing Integrated Defense Systems, Seattle. Senior Engineer Dr. Emily Tran presents the 2050 to 2070 Service Life Extension Program to Air Force acquisition officials. Her presentation includes detailed structural analysis, materials science projections, and cost modeling. The conclusion: B-52H aircraft can be maintained in operational condition through at least 2070 with systematic component replacement and continued modernization programs. We're discussing aircraft that will be 108 years old, says Colonel Robert Hayes, the acquisition officer reviewing the proposal. That's insane. Tran nods. It would be insane if we were flying them in original configuration. But we're not. These aircraft will have fourth-generation engines installed in the 2020s, sixth-generation avionics installed in the 2030s, hypersonic weapons integration in the 2040s. The only original component is the basic aluminum airframe. And that airframe was over-engineered by 1950 standards to the point where it still has 30% remaining fatigue life. The cost analysis shows service life extension through 2070 will cost approximately $11 billion total across the fleet, $145 million per aircraft. Building replacement bombers with equivalent payload capacity would cost $150 to $200 billion minimum. The economic argument is overwhelming. Maintaining the B-52 fleet saves at least $139 billion compared to replacement. What fails first? Hayes asks, what's the actual limiting factor? Tran pulls up a structural diagram. Wing attachment fittings. They're experiencing the highest stress cycles and are most difficult to replace without essentially disassembling the entire aircraft. But even those have been reinforced multiple times. Current projections show they're good through 2065 minimum. After that, we might need to develop completely new wing assemblies, which is technically feasible but expensive. The meeting continues for 3 hours, reviewing every technical detail, every cost assumption, every risk factor. At the end, Hayes signs preliminary approval for continued study. The B-52 will fly into its second century, not because anyone planned it, but because no viable alternative exists at acceptable cost. March 8, 2026. Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, age 24, born in 2002, completes her first solo B-52H mission. Her aircraft commander, Major Frank Torres, watches from the instructor pilot seat as she executes a flawless approach and landing. After shutdown, Torres tells her something that has become tradition. Your great-grandchildren might fly this same aircraft. It's not entirely hyperbole. If the B-52 flies until 2070, and Chun serves a full career before retiring in 2052, her children born in the 2030s could theoretically fly B-52s in the 2050s and 2060s. 4 generations on the same platform. 5 if extended maintenance programs push service life to 2080. Chun struggles to conceptualize this timeline. The aircraft she's flying was built in 1962, 40 years before her birth. It will potentially remain operational 44 years after her planned retirement. The entire span encompasses 118 years, covering most of American aviation history from the Wright brothers to whatever comes next. In the squadron-ready room, a photograph hangs on the wall. A B-52 with its crew from 1964, another with its crew from 1991, another from 2015, another from 2025. Different people, different paint schemes, different weapons loads visible in the background, but the same basic aircraft, recognizable across 60 years of service. The squadron commander has started joking about needing to add more wall space for photographs that will be taken in 2040, 2060, 2080. It's the ship of Theseus, says Captain Mike Rodriguez, Chen's weapons systems officer during the flight. Every part gets replaced, but it's still somehow the same bomber. My grandfather worked on these. My father flew them. Now I'm flying them. And maybe my kids will too, if they're still around. April 20th, 2026. Moscow, Russian Federation. General Viktor Gerasimov reviews intelligence on American bomber modernization programs and experiences professional embarrassment. Russia's Tu-95 Bear bombers, contemporaries of the B-52, continue flying, but in far worse condition. Maintenance has deteriorated. Readiness rates are abysmal. The aircraft that was supposed to prove Soviet aerospace superiority barely manages operational sorties. Meanwhile, American B-52s receive continuous upgrades, new engines, advanced sensors. The gap in capability grows yearly despite both platforms having similar ages. The difference isn't technology, it's systematic investment, maintenance discipline, and institutional commitment to platform longevity. Gerasimov drafts a memo noting, American strategic aviation succeeds through continuous modernization of existing platforms while we struggle to maintain readiness of equivalent systems. This suggests fundamental differences in maintenance philosophy and resource allocation rather than technological gaps. We cannot match American bomber capability without systematic reform of our approach to existing aircraft sustainability. The memo is filed and ignored. Russia lacks resources for systematic reform. The economic constraints that destroyed the Soviet Union continue limiting the Russian Federation. And American B-52s continue demonstrating what sustained investment in platform longevity can achieve. June 15, 2026. National Air and Space Museum, Washington, D.C. Museum curator Dr. Jennifer Adams prepares an exhibit titled The Forever Bomber, 74 Years of B-52 Operations. The exhibit includes original components from early aircraft, modern systems showing upgrade evolution, and interactive displays demonstrating how 1950s airframes carried 2020s weapons. School groups walk through, struggling to understand how their grandparents' flew these same aircraft. One display shows the timeline graphically. 1952 to 2026 marked as operational service, then a dotted line extending to 2050 labeled currently planned, then another dotted line to 2070 labeled extended service possible. A third dotted line extends to 2090 with a question mark, representing theoretical maximum service life, if all components are systematically replaced. Could they really fly for 138 years? Asks a teenager on a school tour. Adams considers how to answer honestly without seeming absurd. The airframes could, theoretically. Whether we'll need them that long depends on future conflicts, technology development, and defense budgets. But the B-52 has survived every prediction of obsolescence for 74 years. Betting against it has been consistently wrong. The exhibit includes Soviet propaganda pieces from the 1950s and 60s, cartoons showing the B-52 as a dinosaur, articles proclaiming bomber aviation dead, intelligence assessments predicting American strategic failure. The juxtaposition with modern photographs of B-52s dropping precision weapons in Syria makes the point wordlessly. The Soviet Union is gone, but the bomber they mocked continues flying. August 3, 2026. Fairchild Air Force Base, Washington. Chief Master Sergeant Robert Garrison, 30 years in aircraft maintenance, 25 of them on B-52s, supervises the installation of the Advanced Battle Management System into tail number 61-0021. The system integrates artificial intelligence-assisted targeting, real-time data fusion from multiple intelligence sources, and autonomous mission planning capabilities. The bomber will essentially pilot itself between waypoints, with human crews making tactical decisions and weapon release authorizations. Garrison remembers installing analog bombing computers in the 1990s, then digital systems in the 2000s, network-centric warfare upgrades in the 2010s, now artificial intelligence in the 2020s. Same airframe, 5 generations of technology. The bomber adapts to whatever advances emerge, incorporating capabilities its designers couldn't have imagined. Chief, asks Technical Sergeant Amanda Martinez, what happens when there's nothing left to upgrade? It's a question Garrison has pondered during 3 decades of watching supposedly obsolete bombers receive modernization after modernization. His answer has evolved. Then we'll have reached the physical limits of what the airframe can support. But I don't think we're there yet. Weight margins still exist. Electrical capacity can be upgraded. The bomb bay can carry whatever fits, until the wings literally fall off from metal fatigue, which current projections say won't happen for another 40-plus years. There's always something that can be improved. The installation continues. Within 6 months, the aircraft will have computational power exceeding the entire Air Force's digital infrastructure from the 1980s. All housed in a bomber designed when computers filled entire rooms and used vacuum tubes. October 10, 2026. Central Military Commission, Beijing, China. General Zhang Youxia reviews intelligence assessments of American bomber capabilities with particular attention to the B-52. Chinese military planning assumes conflict over Taiwan would involve neutralizing American strategic aviation through long-range anti-access/area denial systems. But the B-52's ability to launch standoff weapons from thousands of miles away complicates this calculus significantly. A B-52 carrying 20 AGM-158 JSSMER cruise missiles can launch from Guam, 1,800 miles from Chinese territory, and strike targets throughout mainland China. Chinese air defenses would need to intercept hundreds of incoming cruise missiles while simultaneously dealing with fighter aircraft, submarines, and other threats. The bomber itself never enters engagement range. The Americans maintain 76 B-52 aircraft, Zhang notes during the briefing. Each can carry 20 cruise missiles. That's 1,520 potential incoming weapons from bomber aviation alone, not counting fighter-launched weapons or submarine attacks. Our air defense systems cannot reliably intercept that volume. The assessment is sobering. China has invested heavily in advanced fighters, aircraft carriers, stealth technology. But America's geriatric bombers, older than the People's Republic itself, represent a capability China cannot easily counter. The obsolete platform remains strategically relevant through weapon standoff capability and sheer numbers. Chinese defense planning must account for a threat that flew when Mao Zedong ruled China and will likely still be flying when Xi Jinping's successors govern. The continuity is strategically destabilizing, not through revolutionary capability, but through persistent adequacy. December 18, 2026. Air Force Research Laboratory, Wright-Patterson, AFB. Dr. Kevin Morrison's research team completes simulation modeling of B-52 operations through 2080. The study examines structural limits, technological upgrade pathways, operational scenario requirements, and economic sustainability. The findings suggest that with systematic component replacement, including potential complete wing replacement programs in the 2050s, the B-52 platform can remain viable through the 2070s and possibly beyond. We're essentially discussing maintaining World War II-era design philosophy into the 22nd century, Morrison tells his team. The B-52's fundamental architecture, aluminum airframe, subsonic flight, large payload capacity, hasn't changed. Everything else has evolved continuously. The study identifies potential limiting factors: eventual metal fatigue beyond repair capability, obsolescence of the basic mission concept, emergence of directed energy weapons that render subsonic bombers vulnerable. But none appear imminent. Metal fatigue remains manageable through 2065. The mission concept, delivering large weapons loads to distant targets, remains relevant. Directed energy weapons are decades from tactical deployment. What the study cannot predict: future conflicts, technological breakthroughs, political decisions about defense spending. But within predictable parameters, the B-52 shows no natural endpoint. It survives through what Morrison terms adequate excellence, performance sufficient for requirements without achieving dominance in any single metric. February 4, 2027. Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. Captain James Foster, great-grandson of A.B. B-52 crew chief who served during the Cuban Missile Crisis, flies his first combat sortie, supporting coalition operations against emerging terrorist threats in North Africa. The mission profile is identical to thousands flown since 2001. Orbit at altitude, maintain communications with ground forces, deliver precision weapons when called upon. Foster's aircraft was built 2 years before his great-grandfather retired from Air Force service. It has been continuously upgraded, maintained, and operated through 65 years. Parts of the aircraft are original 1962 manufacturing. Other components were installed last month. The bomber is simultaneously ancient and modern, obsolete and cutting-edge, a museum piece and frontline weapon system. During the mission, Foster receives targeting coordinates, inputs them into computers that interface with GPS satellites that didn't exist when the aircraft first flew, releases precision-guided weapons that autonomously navigate to impact points accurate within meters. The technology is 21st century. The platform delivering it is mid-20th century. The combination works because platforms transcend their era if designed with sufficient underlying soundness. Reaper 7-4, target destroyed, the radio confirms. Excellent work. Foster banks his bomber toward home base, thinking about his great-grandfather serving during the Cold War, his grandfather flying Desert Storm missions, his father deploying to Afghanistan. 4 generations spanning one aircraft type across 75 years of service. The family tradition may extend to his children if current service life projections hold. The B-52 continues not through superiority, but through utility. It remains because replacing it costs more than maintaining it, because missions continue emerging that require its capabilities, because institutional inertia favors incremental improvement over revolutionary replacement. These aren't glorious reasons. They're bureaucratic, economic, practical reasons. But they're sufficient. And sufficiency, as the B-52 proves across 75 years, outlasts glory. May 15, 2027. Zhukovsky Airfield, Russia. Colonel Mikhail Petrov walks through the Russian Air Force Museum past a Tupolev Tu-16 Badger bomber, contemporaneous with the B-52, now corroding on outdoor display. The aircraft hasn't flown in decades. Most of its systems have been cannibalized for parts. It represents a dead end in aviation history, a platform built and retired within expected timelines. Nearby sits a Tu-95 Bear, also retired from operational service, though a handful remain flying. Petrov flew Bears for 15 years before transitioning to administrative duties. He knows these aircraft intimately, their capabilities, and, more importantly, their limitations. Soviet design philosophy emphasized performance over adaptability, revolutionary replacement over evolutionary improvement. It produced remarkable aircraft that served their intended purpose and then became obsolete exactly as planned. The Americans did something different. They built adequate aircraft and made them exceptional through continuous modification. They treated bombers as platforms rather than complete systems. And now, 75 years later, B-52s are receiving their 4th engine replacement, their 6th avionics upgrade, and planning documents discuss operations through 2070. Petrov's official report for the Russian Ministry of Defense notes, American strategic aviation sustainability results from platform-centric design philosophy and institutional commitment to systematic modernization. Soviet/Russian approach of generational replacement proves economically unsustainable except for superpowers with unlimited resources. We possess neither the industrial capacity nor economic strength to compete through continuous next-generation development. Recommendation: study American B-52 sustainment model for application to existing platforms. The report will be filed, read by mid-level bureaucrats, and ignored by senior leadership. Russia lacks resources to implement systematic modernization programs on American scales. The economic model that exhausted the Soviet Union continues constraining the Russian Federation. And American B-52s continue demonstrating what sustained investment achieves across 3/4 of a century. July 22, 2027. Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana. General Thomas Boussier, commander of Air Force Global Strike Command, addresses newly arrived B-52 crew members during their orientation briefing. The young officers and enlisted personnel, most born after September 11, 2001, represent the latest generation to operate aircraft their great-grandparents flew. The B-52 has outlived the Soviet Union. It was built to bomb, Boussier tells them. It has outlived multiple supposed replacement programs. It will likely outlive many of you, statistically speaking. This aircraft survives because we keep making it relevant. New weapons, new sensors, new missions. Your job is to continue that tradition. He pulls up a photograph on the briefing screen. A black and white image from 1955 showing a B-52 on alert during the early Cold War. Next to it, a color photograph from 2027 showing an identical aircraft, possibly the same airframe, loaded with modern precision weapons. 72 years separate the images. The bomber looks essentially unchanged externally while being fundamentally transformed internally. Everything the Soviet generals said about this aircraft was correct, Boussier continues. It was obsolete in 1955 by the standards they were measuring. Subsonic in an age moving toward supersonic flight. Conventional metal construction when exotic materials were emerging. Large radar cross-section when stealth was being conceptualized. But they measured wrong. They measured performance specifications when they should have measured adaptability. The B-52 survives because it adapts. The briefing covers technical systems, operational procedures, safety protocols. But the underlying message resonates. You are inheriting a legacy platform that has served longer than any other combat aircraft in history. It survives not through technological dominance, but through persistent utility and economic rationality. It will likely still be flying when you retire. September 8, 2027. Boeing Integrated Defense Systems, Seattle. Engineers gather for the 75th anniversary commemoration of the B-52's first flight. The company cafeteria displays historical photographs, technical drawings, and timeline charts showing the aircraft's evolution. Ed Wells, the original chief engineer, is long deceased, but his design philosophy persists. Build structurally sound platforms with sufficient margins to accommodate future modifications. Current Boeing engineers discuss the challenges of supporting an aircraft design 75 years old. Original technical drawings are scanned and digitized. Manufacturing processes have changed entirely. Modern techniques replace 1950s methods. Supply chains must be maintained for components no longer commercially available. Yet the work continues because the Air Force continues operating the platform, and operating platforms require industrial support. We're supporting our great-grandparents' design, says senior engineer Dr. Lisa Takahashi. That's unprecedented in aerospace. The 747 is being retired after 50 years. Military fighters serve 20 to 30 years typically. But the B-52 just keeps going because the fundamental platform is sound and the mission requirements continue existing. The commemoration includes presentations on future upgrade programs, hypersonic weapons integration in the 2030s, advanced defensive systems in the 2040s, potential sixth-generation engine replacements in the 2050s. Planning documents extend to 2070, but everyone understands that date is arbitrary. If the airframes remain structurally sound and missions require their capabilities, they'll continue flying past any currently projected timeline. October 18, 2027. 75 years. On the exact anniversary of that first XB-52 flight from Edwards Air Force Base, B-52H tail number 60-0001, the oldest H model still in service, flies a commemorative mission. The pilot, Colonel Jennifer Hayes, follows approximately the same route Guy Townsend flew in 1952, takeoff from Edwards, orbit over the Mojave Desert, return for landing. The aircraft is 65 years old. Hayes is 38. The bomber will likely outlive her career. It has already outlived the Soviet Union, the Cold War, multiple regional conflicts, countless predictions of obsolescence. and numerous supposed replacement programs. It survives through bureaucratic inertia, economic rationality, and engineering conservatism that built margins sufficient for 3/4 of a century of modifications. Soviet generals mocked this bomber in the 1950s. They predicted its rapid obsolescence. They built their own bombers to superior specifications. They developed missiles that would make strategic aviation irrelevant. They were correct about everything except what mattered. The B-52's ability to adapt outlasted their ability to compete. The B-52 represents that principle embodied in aluminum, engines, and persistence. As Hayes brings the commemorative flight in for landing, 75 other B-52s sit on alert or conduct missions worldwide. They will fly tomorrow. They will fly next year. They will fly, current projections suggest, for another 23 to 43 years minimum, perhaps longer. The Soviets mocked the B-52. Then they collapsed. The bomber keeps flying.